Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here with us at Connect Karo 2021. My name is Rosalind Milch, and I lead partnerships for the Cities program at WRI-India. It is my pleasure to welcome you all for this keynote address session. At the end of the keynote, we would have some time for QA with the speaker, so I would request any participants to drop in queries in the chat box, and we'll try our best to take them up. And now to introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to welcome Mr. Jamshed Godrej, Chairman and Managing Director of Godrej & Boyce. As the Chairman of our board, Mr. Godrej continues to be a valuable advisor for all of our work in furthering action towards sustainable cities. I would now request him to kick off the session with a few words and by introducing our keynote speaker. Over to you, Mr. Godrej.
Thank you, and welcome to all our participants, and welcome to Mr. Aniruddha Dasgupta. Ani is President and CEO of WRI, where he works to advance the Institute's global vision to improve the lives of all people and ensure that nature can thrive. Ani is widely recognized leader in the areas of sustainable cities, urban design, and poverty alleviation. He developed his expertise in positions ranging from non-profits in India to the World Bank, where he developed the bank's first knowledge strategy. He took the helm of WRI after 7 years as the global director of the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, which is dedicated to shaping a future where cities work better for all people. Under his leadership, the cities program grew to 400 staff members working in 150 cities with a reach to more than 400 cities in total. He has established large multi-stakeholder partnerships with city, national, and corporate leaders around the world. Ani has helped create and lead innovative initiatives, including the new Urban Mobility Alliance, the Coalition for Urban Transitions, as well as a new line of work around urban air quality. He has also brought an increased focus on people and equity to the program. Prior to joining WRI in 2014, Ani served as Director of Knowledge and Learning at the World Bank, where he provided leadership in the bank's knowledge services for development. He also worked extensively in the World Bank's Jakarta office as head of infrastructure, where he was deeply engaged in post-2004 tsunami reconstruction in Aceh as an advisor to the government on housing and infrastructure reconstruction, and as the head of the bank's housing and infrastructure team. His work at the bank took him throughout Asia and Eastern Europe as a technical expert centered on community-based development, urban environment, disaster management, solid waste management, water supply, and sanitation. Ani is originally from Delhi in India, and he developed an early interest in his life in buildings and design. He earned a bachelor's degree in architecture with an emphasis on low-income housing at the School of Planning and Architecture in India. Later, he was accepted at a special program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology focused on affordable housing. Ani holds a master's degree from MIT in city planning and architecture. Ani lives in Washington, DC with his wife and 2 sons. And it is a great pleasure for me to not just introduce Ani to this audience, but also to say that he has done an enormous amount to make the cities program at WRI really relevant around the world. And now as the leader of WRI, he will take his experience around the world. So with those few words, may I now request Ani to address us.
Thank you very much, Jamshed. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm really grateful for your introduction. And as you can imagine from Jamshed, this is my favorite topic. This is my favorite community. So I'm very, very glad OP and Madhav included me in this conversation. I'm going to share my slide, and I hope, Rosalind, we have time for questions after this, because this is a discussion. Just give me 1 second. Rosalind, you can do thumbs up to see if you can see my slide. Perfect. I want to share with you, as you all work in cities in India, and we look at, as you at WRI, we work across the world on cities. I find at this particular moment we are a year and a half, more than a year and a half into this pandemic. And this is everywhere in the world. I think we are looking the light of actual recovery. I find cities in a very epicenter of the conversation of the pandemic, of the crisis, but also of recovery. So I want to share with you what we're looking at in the world and what's happening in India. But the main point I think you will see is that what is the opportunity in India, what's happening in India is very similar what's happening in the world. And it is together that we will have a chance to think about it. And it's an incredible moment, I feel, of opportunity for thinking about cities. So it's clear. So that's why it's called Transformation in the City, because it is a moment that we need to really grab. It's a moment that might not come anytime soon. That is at least my view. It's an incredible moment of crisis. Though we all talk about the pandemic, it's actually really a city-centric event. It is, if you look at this chart is very recent, Joe Hopkins, where the incidence of the disease and all these, if I overlaid this diagram with a diagram where the cities are in the world, you will see it's very similar. So though it's a global pandemic, it is actually spread, but where it is, how it's impacting not only this disease, which of course we know, but the economic impact of what's happening, it's very urban centric. And across the world, it's impacted every systems. And not only is every system, people started writing, if you remember, a year back, oh, will cities survive? Is this the end of cities? And that's the kind of narrative that emerged. And obviously, this is not the first pandemic. This is a severe one that has happened to the world. The Spanish flu was a pandemic. Cities have recovered. I believe evidence of history shows cities not only will recover, but it'll be different. Absolutely. The question is, do we use this moment as during Spanish flu, or the cholera before that? A whole slew of reform came to cities and made cities better actually from that. Will we do that in this? That is, but what are we, we read this newspaper article, what exactly are we learning? I think from us, as we look at cities across the world, we're learning 5 things from us. This is a simplifying. One, though the crisis did not start among poor, it has impacted the poor in cities and everywhere disproportionately, everywhere in the world. I can show you data from every country. This is true for India. And the second is the social infrastructure is as critical for resilience than economic and physical infrastructure. The health infrastructure is as important for cities to function than just the way we used to think about infrastructure, which is building an economic infrastructure, how the markets work. For us to think about resilience of cities, we really need to also think about social infrastructure. And the third, when low-income people, and this is so true in India, is actually not part of it because they're sick or they can't go to work because the public transport doesn't work, the city as a system actually ceases to exist. So this essential worker euphemism that we use, it can be more important than ever. And fourth, there is a huge budget deficit because of the expenditure cities have faced in multiple things, including public transport. I'll talk about that in a minute. But all this are the kind of the negative thing, but we also seeing across the cities in the world a huge opportunity, a political space for innovation, political experimentation across the world. From, of course, in India, you're seeing it. I'll slide a little later. You see it in Bogota, you see it in Paris, you see it in Milan, New York. People are using this opportunity of change, of pause, to reinvent and rethink how cities should be used. So there is a really real positive space right now across the city. What should be? Cities are critical. Getting cities right is critical in the world. Most people live there. Most of the economic activity happen there. I don't need to tell you about, if you're joining this conference, I think you know this. And the more important point is, if you don't get cities right, is it impossible, actually literally physically impossible to get to 1.5 degrees. And this is true for India than anywhere else. About 2.5 billion more people will live in cities than they live today. That enormous shift, as you can see from the green dots, will happen in 2 regions. And in our subcontinent, India, This is where growth in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a moment, if there is any moment to use this to change our path towards a successful cities, is critical for economy, for our people, for our climate. And as you can see, the growth, 400+ million people will live in cities. So the moment we see ourselves right now, but the bigger point I want to make is that the response we need, it's not only city, of course, every city we need to, but we need to have a national response to connect this, because it's not one city that's happening. Urbanization and how cities work needs to be part of is how a country should work, and country needs to work to get the economy back together. And that is at least our research shows, cities and national government needs to work together. This is a common message everywhere. At this moment in the world, there is $20 trillion, I repeat, trillion dollars being allocated to recover, mostly in rich countries, not only in rich countries, to recover from this pandemic. This is an incredible moment to make sure those resources are going to the right places to make our cities better, for our national systems better, so that not only we recover, we actually get to a better place. The point I'm making is, this is an incredible opportunity. Of course, an incredible moment of crisis, but an opportunity to get things in the right direction. This that is happening, it is what we're observing in India is actually very similar. I just want to point out, rich countries and poor countries having for the first time, I think, for a long time, having a very similar moment. You know, the inequality or impact of this crisis that we see on the poor disproportionate, we see it everywhere. We see it in London, we see it in New York, we of course see it in India. This whole India's workforce, which is 90% informal, the total workforce, a very significant part has been impacted of this workforce by this COVID. Similarly, if you look at informal sector, 1.2 billion people live in informal sector in the world. And the first time in the history, in last two few decades, the first time there's an increase in poverty because of this. So 97 million more people, this is the World Bank report, actually more poor people this year. This was a fantastically positive trend for decades now of reduction of poverty. Actually, the world was doing a very good job in poverty reduction. Suddenly, we actually raising 3 years from gain in just one pandemic. So this is the context. Similarly, in urban systems, we all know this, you've seen in India, that the public transit, which is kind of a lifeline for a city to work, especially, again, repeat, especially for poorer people, there's been decline across for many reasons. For health reasons, people are worried, people are, the transit companies didn't have enough money from earning. And again, we see this everywhere else in the world. We see it in EU, $50 billion shortfall. You know the Indian numbers well, of $7 billion plus revenue. New York City needs $12 billion just to stay afloat, as this famous New York City subway company itself, which has one of the highest ridership before COVID. You know, this is a peculiar moment for cities, for its systems. And this public transit impact actually felt a lot more by poor people, simply because they're more dependent on public transit. In Africa, for example, public transport costs, there is a 9% population, just this fact, the inability to go to their work in a dependable or affordable way because public transit costs have increased. So this is the context we see ourselves, the multidimensional context that impacts cities. So what do we do? How do we use this moment to recover in the right way? Not only, of course, we will recover. We all know, you are already seeing in India the signs of recovery. Of course, the question is, how do we use this moment to recover the direction and to make sure this is what WRI, this is what Madhav, OP, is to actually learn from what's happening for the last 2 years in a systematic way, so that we can channel that learning towards outcome. So one of the most important things that I just said, $14–15 trillion. And as you can see in there, so we did an analysis, this money, how is this money being pledged? It's not spent yet, right? And you can see the green or blue, I don't know how it shows on your screen, is the green part of the investment, and the red is not green part of the investment. And we did an analysis of all the investments. As you can see, India is in the middle somewhere. with some positive and green technology, some not so green technology. But you can imagine why that is the case, right? People are trying to recover. So a lot of the money is health systems or job recovery programs and things like that. And some, of course, the long-term investment. This is a very important moment to think about how this fund is being, how we can actually channel it. Because the point I want to make is decarbonization or is not the only thing. There are 4 outcomes we want right now that is clear from what has just happened and what we need to do in this decade. 1, of course, we want to decarbonize economies to get to 1.5 billion. More importantly, for our countries we work in, especially India, we want to make sure whatever we do, we create the right jobs in the right place, the right kind of people. So recovery has to be part of economic recovery, has to be part of this for all the reasons I pointed out. Third, while we do this recovery, it has to be equitable, meaning poorer people who have been disproportionately affected, they were already poor, it has to be part of the solutions we are thinking about. So not only we create jobs, we create the right kind of. Fourth, very important, this is something we have not focused on enough, that our solutions that we choose to invest on actually has to protect nature and enhance nature's capacity. Why is that important? It is important simply because in the next decade, we today spew out about 35 gigatons or 34 gigatons of carbon dioxide in the world. So we need to, of course, reduce that, that's mitigate, reduce the amount of carbon. But at the same time, nature or natural ecosystem on land, on ocean, actually absorbed about half of the carbon we spew out in the air today. If that natural system is not protected, our ability to absorb carbon reduces, which is what's happening right now. So not only we need to reduce the carbon we put in the world for us to have a sustainable world, we have to increase the capacity of nature to thrive. Has to be, these 4 things have to be part of our solution. So the question is, what can we do that gets us all 4 of these outcomes? Because we don't have time or the resources to do one at a time. We'll create jobs now, we'll decarbonize later, we'll protect nature after that. We actually have done the work with a lot of our partners to come up with specific solutions, specific sector that actually allows us to do those. 7 areas we find in cities: green construction retrofits, clean mobility, renewable energy, active transport, nature-based solutions, waste recycling, waste and resources, and R&D to get new technologies in all these forms. These are this is a work that we have done with 50 organizations across the world. And while we do this, we need to get 3 of our systems in place, which are very obvious. Fiscal reforms to make sure the money is aligned what cities and national governments are providing. Governance reforms, so there's alignment in decision-making because resources are finite. And finally, financial reform, how actually funds flows. More importantly, I think all of us are concerned to make sure private sector finance does flow in the 7 things I say in the top, because the amount of fund needed is not enough is there in the public. So these are the kind of reforms that is, and this is available, Madhav and Opi can make it available to all of us to show, there is, what I'm pointing out, it's not rocket science to figure out what needs to be done. It is a narrow path, but the path is actually, the science is telling us what the path is. And some of these things that you see in the science seem obvious to you. I want to focus a little bit on job, because jobs is something everyone in the world is talking about, and I'm sure you are talking about in every conversation, because it's a very important point right now. There's been enormous job loss. But our research shows the understanding of what creates job. We feel there is a big misunderstanding of what, because what we see in different countries, first thing that happens, let's go repave roads, because people's understanding is that is the easiest way to create jobs. And if you look at the first of the diagrams here, which is green construction, we find retrofits or efficiency investment, that's a much bigger impact per dollar spent or per rupee spent to creating job than fossil fuel. So I think point I'm making is, I think we need a better understanding of what exactly creates jobs and how many for an investment made. And our analysis shows that the greener ones that you see, renewable energy, clean mobility, active transport, nature, actually across the board, waste is a very good example. There is the job creation impact is much higher in this, at least from our investigation. And I think this is very important to understand, because jobs needs to be central to the discussions we have, because we have to recover economy while we green. I want to end by saying, you say, how can we do all this? This is too complicated. I want to share 2 examples very quickly from our work, our India team, that these are the kind of analysis, that's kind of systems thinking that we need, because the investments are always scarce. Because the amount of money we have to do these things are limited. We want to make sure every dollar gets us as far as possible in these 4 dimensions that I mentioned. So this is an example from Dharavi, which is, our cities are becoming denser, they're less green place, building material is actually making it hotter. You know this. What is hidden actually, how many people die of heat in the world and in India. And it is a kind of a hidden thing because we don't connect that with climate change. We say, oh, this is hotter in India, people die. But actually the numbers is constantly increasing. This is an example of the Andheri Ghatkopar link road, where this is, as you can see, this is a metro line which was developed, density is coming. And as you can see, there is no greenery and in a kind of a daunting looking space. The solutions of this, the team has worked on, is to actually find a solution that is gray-green, bring not only green, this is an example of what multiple outcome can be with a small intervention. This is a relatively low cost investments where not only you can make it greener, so it's cooler, you can make space for communities that were in the sides, as you can see, to come together. You can make it safer for bicyclists to come, but also is you put more greenery in cities that absorbs carbon. So these are the kind of multiple outcome gestures or solutions that this is similar also the work that the team has been doing for a long time in public transportation to get transportation right. So that, which is one of the bigger issues for us, not only for congestion, but the carbon that it's used, but also access to poor people. So the team has been working on is to how do you get a solution that has this multiple outcome? How do you make it more equitable and accessible? How do you make it greener by introducing electric buses so that it is actually not only the service available, but actually reduces the carbon emissions or CO2 emissions? But also, how do you get more people in buses or public transport, not just buses, so that there's less congestion on streets, so the cities are more livable, more attractive? And finally, how do we integrate the multiple ways public transport happens in India, but not only buses, informal transport, transport provided by private sector, Olas and Ubers of the world? How do you integrate in a single system for a user? It's an attractive option to. So this is a work which has defined our program for a long time. And a lot of you know, Karo has been a program, but historically we are focused in because we have found this kind of a wedge that actually gets us this multiple outcome we're looking for: decarbonization, accessibility, making it good for poor people, making the city a more productive place so there are more jobs in that. So this is the kind of work. And this kind of work, I must say, as we work in cities across the world, we see innovation everywhere. You saw Mumbai's climate plan is one example, but across the world, cities is a kind of a fountain of innovation. We just have to capture, learn from them, expand them, learn from each other. This is something WRI, we pledge ourselves to bring knowledge from different places to India, but also what we're learning from India to different places. I just want to say, ultimately, right now, these are the 3 things every government is thinking about. How do you create public safety from the disease? How do you actually create jobs? How do you get targeted support to the communities that's been impacted? I think our job as professionals is not only to help make sure this happens, but to make sure that these investments are used for the longer term impact that we need in the cities, to make cities more resilient, more low carbon, more productive, and more inclusive. So that is the framing device I think we are ourselves using. This is the moment, I think, as we recover from this pandemic, is to really use this moment to reflect of what is the kind of cities we need. We all know we need different kinds of cities, and use this moment of rethink, rebirth, and investment to go to the place we want to. Again, Jamshed, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ani. Thank you for sharing those very pertinent thoughts on how the cities are really at the epicenter of pandemic as well as recovery, and how this is truly an opportunity for our cities to actually reinvent. Maybe we have time for just probably one question, so we'll quickly take that. The biggest brunt of climate inaction is being faced by underserved communities. To what extent do you think the efforts at the local level, especially in cities, are able to actually incorporate social justice and equity concerns? To what level at the moment? And what kind of opportunities can this present for us to bridge between climate action and development issues?
Thank you, Rosalind. I think that's a fundamental question. I just want to point out that poverty or injustice in cities just didn't happen because of COVID. It existed at scale. What has happened of COVID is it has become extremely visible across the world. I want to point out, I just want to contextualize what's happening. It's happening everywhere. Every city in the world has found that poor people are much. So this is a moment for us, as I've been saying, to actually think about how do we incorporate solutions that are not only for good for poor people for our cities. Our research, we are about to complete a 5-year research, which we will absolutely, Madhav will do something in India about that, on the World Resource Report on cities, which absolutely shows evidence that cities and poor people, in significant portion of cities are poor people who live in, are low-income people, that what the solutions for that's good for cities is good for our low-income population, and the vice versa, that low-income population participating successfully in city and being productive and getting the service actually good for cities to go forward. So this is a moment for us actually to incorporate solution that is citywide, actually make cities more equitable, more accessible. Our view is that as cities focus on service provision, make it more accessible it will become better for the whole city. I just want to point out, this is not just about recovery. It's also recovery about decarbonization, but also about adaptation. Cities are already facing and poor on issues on water, for example, issues of transport. How do you adapt our cities to be and our population in cities to be more having resources to be participate in a more successful way. So I think that is central for how cities will succeed in the future.
Great. Thank you, Ani. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take any more questions. I would request Mr. Godrej to please share our thanks and close our session for today.
Thank you, Rose.
Thanks. Right. Thank you, Ani, for that wonderful presentation. I think putting people at the center of any type of transformation is, I think, the most critical point. And we talk a lot about a just transition, but the just transition is about people. It's not about anything else. And so I'm really happy that you were able to bring that out so clearly in your presentation. And yes, of course, we need lots of transitions, but the most important one is the one which will benefit those who have been left behind the most. So thank you very much for bringing that out so clearly, and look forward to a discussion on these topics in future with you. So thanks from all of us here in India.
Thank you so much, Jamshed. Thank you for including me.
Great. Thank you, Ani, and thank you everyone for joining us for this session today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions for the evening. Thank you.